They said the sun never sets gently on a madman's dream. On the outskirts of Jacksonville, where the swamp meets the sky and silence holds its breath, an old mansion once stood, its white columns gleaming like ivory bones under the southern heat. Inside those walls, a man believed he could change the course of human history. His name was Dr. William Harrow, and in the summer of 1936, he began the experiment that would forever stain the soul of Florida. The story begins not in madness, but in brilliance. William Harrow was born in 1892 in Savannah, Georgia, a boy of sharp mind and colder heart. His father was a preacher, his mother a school teacher, and from the earliest days he saw perfection not as beauty, but as order. He would spend hours watching the ants in the garden, fascinated by their uniformity. No hesitation, he once wrote in his boyhood journal. No confusion, no weakness, only the strong move forward. But before we continue this disturbing story, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves hidden stories. It helps bring more of these untold truths to light. By the time he was 17, the world had already begun to whisper his name. He won scholarships, wrote papers on genetics before most men even knew the word, and graduated from Harvard with honors at 23. The First World War came soon after, and Harrow served as a medic, patching up soldiers, studying the ones who lived, and dissecting the ones who didn't. He claimed it was for research. His superiors called him brilliant. His comrades called him God's mistake. After the war, Harrow disappeared for nearly a decade. Some said he went to Europe, to Berlin, to Vienna, to the places where the eugenics movement was taking shape. Others said he wandered the southern states, collecting data, observing bloodlines. When he resurfaced in 1930, he was no longer just a scientist, he was a visionary. He spoke of controlled evolution, of moral genetics, and of a generation sculpted by discipline. Florida, he said, was the perfect ground to begin. At that time, Florida was still half wild. Its cities were small, its towns bound by old superstition and new money. The Depression had broken most men, but not Harrow. With funding from private investors, wealthy families who believed in racial purity and feared the decay of the human stock, he purchased a massive tract of land near the St. Johns River. On it, he built what he called the Harrow Institute for Human Advancement. Locals called it the Master's Place. It wasn't just a laboratory, it was a community, fenced and isolated. He brought in families from across the state, men and women of certain desirable traits as he described them. Farmers, soldiers, nurses, and teachers, all screened, selected, and promised a future for their children that would be free of weakness. Every house on the compound was identical. Every child followed a schedule. Meals were timed, words were monitored, even marriages were arranged. To the outside world, it seemed like an ideal community, an American utopia in the heart of the swamp. But inside, it was something else entirely. The residents called Harrow the Master, not because he demanded it, but because he made them believe it. His calm voice carried the weight of scripture. He held lectures under the dim lights of the assembly hall, speaking of destiny, purity, and progress. "We are the architects of tomorrow," he told them, "and tomorrow must be flawless." One of the first to doubt him was a woman named Evelyn Price, a schoolteacher from Tampa. She had been selected for her intelligence and health, brought to the institute with promises of joining a great social experiment. But what she found there disturbed her. She wrote letters, never mailed, describing the way Harrow observed children like livestock, the way doctors took samples, measured skulls, and whispered about eliminations. In one letter dated November 1933, she wrote, "They call it the nursery, but it feels like a breeding house. I heard crying last night. It wasn't the cry of a child. It was older, deeper. Someone was taken. No one talks about it, but everyone knows." Rumors began to spread in nearby towns. Locals spoke of trucks arriving late at night, carrying crates covered in tarps. Some said they were filled with equipment. Others swore they saw movement inside, shapes, bodies. Sheriff Calvin Reddick visited the compound once, only to leave an hour later pale and trembling. He resigned the next morning without explanation. By 1934, the Institute had over 200 residents. They lived in strict routine: morning exercises, nutrition checks, evening lectures. There was a sense of pride, yes, but also fear. Those who failed health inspections were reassigned, though no one knew where. The ones who questioned the program disappeared quietly, their names struck from records. And through it all, Dr. Harrow remained calm, methodical, certain. He kept a private study beneath the mansion, a place no one entered but him. Witnesses described hearing low hums, the sound of machinery, and sometimes, on humid nights, a faint metallic rhythm echoing through the ground, like a mechanical heartbeat. In the summer of 1935, something changed. The children of the Institute began to fall ill. Fevers, convulsions, strange rashes. The in-house doctors claimed it was swamp fever. But Evelyn Price, who worked in the educational ward, noticed a pattern. The sickest children were the ones Harrow had marked with a small tattoo on their wrist, a symbol resembling two overlapping circles. She confronted him one night after a lecture. Witnesses say the exchange was brief. He smiled, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Every birth requires sacrifice. Miss Price, evolution does not apologize." The next morning, Evelyn was gone. Her home was emptied, her records erased. But her letters, sealed in a tin box, would be found years later, buried behind the old schoolhouse. By 1936, the Harrow Institute reached its peak. Newspapers praised it as a model of health and discipline. The governor himself visited the compound and shook Harrow's hand. Photographs from that day show him smiling, a tall man in a white suit, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Behind him, a line of children stood perfectly still. Identical haircuts, identical smiles, identical silence. But behind the illusion of order, the experiment was spiraling out of control. One of Harrow's assistants, a young biologist named Thomas Keene, began keeping notes. He described hidden chambers under the mansion, cold rooms, he called them, where failed subjects were taken. He wrote of injections, behavioral conditioning, and forced pairings. He believes he can mold instinct, Keene noted. But he's breeding obedience, not perfection. On June 12, 1936, Keene vanished. That same week, a fire broke out in one of the dormitories. 5 children and 2 adults were reported dead, though no bodies were recovered. The official statement blamed a lightning strike, but locals near the river saw smoke long before the storm. By late July, the Institute gates were locked to outsiders. Deliveries stopped. The telephones went dead. No one knows what truly happened inside during those last weeks. But fragments survive. Records, journal entries, and a few photographs discovered decades later in a sealed county archive. One of those photographs shows a long hallway filled with hospital beds. Each bed holds a sleeping child, perfectly still, faces covered. At the end of the hall stands Harrow, his back to the camera, hand resting on a machine that looks too advanced for its time. The caption reads only, Phase 3, Initiation. Then, one night in September 1936, a massive explosion tore through the Harrow compound. Locals saw flames rising miles away. The ground trembled, the sky turned red, and by morning, the mansion was gone. No survivors were found. No remains of Dr. Harrow. The official report listed it as an industrial accident. The state seized the land, filled the crater, and built over it. For decades, it was forgotten, until the letters, the photos, and the whispers began resurfacing in the late 1980s. One investigator, a historian named Rebecca Holt, described the moment she first read Evelyn Price's letters. "It felt like holding a pulse from the past," she said. Every word carried the echo of someone who saw too much, too early. But the strangest discovery came not from the archives, but from a DNA analysis of a small lock of hair found in one of the preserved boxes labeled Subject 7F. The results showed anomalies, gene sequences that didn't match any known human database. To this day, no one knows where that lock of hair came from, but some locals claim that deep in the woods near the old site, animals are born deformed, too symmetrical, too quiet, their eyes eerily human. The Harrow Institute may have burned, but perhaps not everything inside it perished. Some say Harrow succeeded, just not in the way he intended. And if you visit that part of Florida today, you might hear stories whispered by old fishermen about strange figures seen walking near the river at night, pale and silent, moving in perfect unison beneath the moonlight. They call them the Harrow children, and some believe they're still waiting for their master to return. The earth had long healed over the ruins. By 1983, the swamp had reclaimed everything: the mansion, the fences, the rows of identical houses. Cypress roots coiled around the old foundation stones like veins tightening around a buried heart. When the government surveyors arrived to mark the area for redevelopment, they didn't expect to find anything human beneath the soil. But one of them, a young cartographer named David Niles, struck metal while driving his stake into the ground. It was a hatch, corroded, circular, hidden beneath decades of moss. When they forced it open, a wave of cold air rushed out, foul and heavy, as if trapped for generations. Inside, their flashlights revealed a staircase descending into darkness. The state ordered the site sealed. But not before a few photographs were taken. One showed rows of glass cylinders, cracked, filled with murky fluid. Another captured a steel table bolted to the floor, straps still intact. And on the far wall, etched into the metal, were 3 words written in precise, clinical lettering: "Perfect by design." When those images leaked to the press months later, the legend of the Florida Master came roaring back. Rebecca Holt, the historian who had once spoken of Evelyn Price's letters, was among the first to return to the site. She had spent years chasing rumors, archives lost in floods, police files that had vanished from state records, interviews with elderly locals who remembered the Master's town. But this was different. She described it in her field journal. "It's not a ruin, it's a grave. And whatever he buried here, it was meant to be found only when the world was ready." Her partner on the investigation was Dr. Marcus Bell, a geneticist from the University of Miami. Bell wasn't interested in ghosts or legends. He wanted proof, and he found it. Samples taken from the sealed basement revealed preserved tissue unlike any he'd seen. The cells didn't degrade properly. They replicated irregularly, defying standard biological aging. Bell published his findings in a private report, circulated quietly among academic circles. Within months, he received anonymous funding offers, job invitations, and then threats. His apartment was broken into twice. His lab notes disappeared. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued her own research into Harrow's personal life, piecing together fragments from forgotten archives. She found that Harrow's investors had been members of a group called the League for Genetic Integrity, a short-lived but influential organization with deep political ties. They had funded social improvement projects across the South, medical sterilization programs, orphanage screenings, even adoption trials. The more she read, the clearer it became. The Harrow Institute was never a rogue experiment. It was a prototype. One evening, while reviewing documents at the Jacksonville Public Library, Rebecca received a package with no return address. Inside were old negatives, labeled in faded ink. Phase 4, Continuation. The images showed faces, young adults, late teens, photographed under harsh light. Their features were unnatural, too symmetrical. Identical expressions, identical gazes. A row of perfection that didn't feel human. Across one of the photos, scribbled in red pencil, was a single word: survivors. Rebecca and Bell traveled north, following the trail of adoption records connected to the Institute. Most of them led to dead ends, missing files, destroyed hospitals. But one led to a small coastal town called St. Augustine Shores, where a now-defunct children's home had operated through the late 1930s and 40s. When they arrived, the building was in ruins, its walls carved with initials, its windows shattered. The caretaker, an old woman named Mrs. Darnell, remembered stories from her youth. Children arriving in the middle of the night, pale, silent, and eerily obedient. "They never cried," she said. "Not once. No matter what you did. It was like they didn't know how." Among the abandoned records, Rebecca found a list of names. 27 children transferred from HIHA Jacksonville Division in 1937. Each entry ended with a red stamp, cleared for relocation. Bell's excitement grew. He believed these children were Harrow's successes, the ones who survived the explosion, or were moved before it. But Rebecca hesitated. She had seen enough to know that Harrow's vision wasn't simply biological. It was ideological. He wasn't just trying to shape the human genome. He was trying to rewrite what it meant to feel. Over the next months, they tracked the names through census data. Many had disappeared without a trace, but a few, just a few, had lived long enough to leave footprints. One name stood out, Samuel Price. Rebecca froze when she read it. Evelyn Price's surname, the same woman who vanished in 1933. The boy's birth certificate listed mother unknown, father William H. Bell dismissed it as coincidence. Rebecca didn't. They found Samuel living in Clearwater, now an elderly man in his late 40s, working as a mechanic. He agreed to meet them after some hesitation. In a small diner by the shore, he told them fragments of a life that never made sense. "I don't dream," he said quietly. "Not since I was a kid, but sometimes I remember things that never happened to me. A big house, white walls, the sound of metal turning. A man in a white coat who called me Model 7. Bell convinced him to provide a DNA sample. The results came weeks later. The sequences were unlike anything in Bell's database, identical, strand for strand, to the tissue recovered from the underground lab. "Samuel," Bell whispered as he read the report, "you weren't born. You were made." News of the discovery didn't stay quiet for long. Someone leaked Bell's report. Within days, the media swarmed with headlines: Florida Frankenstein, the Harrow legacy, the Perfect Race Project resurfaces. But not everyone wanted the truth told. Rebecca's apartment was ransacked. Her phone lines were tapped. Bell disappeared after attending a conference in Tallahassee. His car was found abandoned near the I-10 bridge. Inside, police recovered only a blood-stained notebook and a cassette tape. The tape was later transcribed by investigators. "If anyone hears this, stop looking. They're not gone. They moved it. The project. It's still active. The design was never abandoned. They're breeding silence itself." The rest dissolved into static. Rebecca refused to stop. Driven by fear and curiosity, she returned once more to the Harrow site. The hatch had been resealed, but she forced her way in. Beneath layers of dust, she discovered a second chamber she'd missed before, smaller, circular, lined with rusted machinery. At its center stood a single chair surrounded by mirrors, each etched with strange geometric symbols. On the floor lay a small, preserved notebook. The handwriting was unmistakable. Harrow's own. "Perfection is not beauty. It is obedience. When the mind ceases to question, evolution begins. Subject 7F shows promise. The replication cycle stabilizes. Soon, Phase 4 will continue beyond me." Rebecca realized what the continuation meant. Harrow's work hadn't died in 1936. It had been transferred, carried on by others, possibly by his own creations. As she read deeper, she noticed a series of coordinates written at the bottom of the final page, somewhere near the Everglades. She left that night, her notes packed tight, and disappeared into the marshlands with a single camera and her voice recorder. The last message she ever sent to her editor was a short, breathless phone call. "I found them. Marcus was right. They're not human." No one ever heard from her again. 2 months later, a hiker discovered a weathered cassette player near a flooded path west of Naples. The tape inside was damaged, but a few fragments survived. A woman's voice, trembling yet composed, spoke over the sound of insects and wind. "They live in the water now, not far from the shore. I can hear them humming, the same rhythm from the old machines. They don't speak, but they listen. When I called his name, they turned, all at once. There were children among them, or something like children. Skin pale as bone, eyes gray and glassy, perfect symmetry. They looked at me as if I were broken." A long silence followed, then a whisper, barely audible. He finished it. The tape ended. In the years that followed, Official agencies dismissed the Harrow case as conspiracy. The land was declared off-limits, unstable terrain. But satellite imaging from 1997 revealed something strange. Faint geometric patterns in the marshland, too precise to be natural. Some say they mark the outline of a hidden facility. Others say they move. Those who live near the area still tell stories of fishermen who vanish, of strange lights glimmering under the swamp water, of voices that echo in unison. And every so often, when the fog drifts in from the river, locals claim they can see figures standing at the edge of the trees, motionless, watching, waiting. For what? No one knows. But the legend says their master promised he would return when the world was ready to be perfected again. And maybe somewhere beneath the water and roots of old Florida, his children are still listening for that command. The swamp was quiet again. Decades had passed since anyone dared to speak the name Harrow out loud, but some names never truly die. They wait, buried in paper, hidden in files, whispered in hallways of buildings where windows never open. In 2005, a quiet man named Dr. Aaron Cole joined a genetics research firm in Tallahassee called Virion Laboratories. The company presented itself as a biomedical think tank, funded by private investors interested in human adaptability research. But inside its sealed basement, behind retinal scanners and unmarked doors, they studied something else. Dr. Cole wasn't supposed to see the old folders. He found them one night while reviewing blood data for an autoimmune project. Strange sequences, repeating, unnaturally perfect. The samples were labeled with codes that didn't match the company's patient list. At the bottom of the form, typed faintly in a forgotten font, were 3 words that froze him. HIHA, Florida Division. He didn't understand what it meant at first, but curiosity became obsession. Over the next weeks, he dug deeper. He traced the code to a defunct organization once called the Harrow Institute for Human Advancement. He found the name in a 1930s medical archive alongside records of sterilization programs and selective birth trials. Every clue pulled him further into a darkness that felt older than the country itself. Then, one evening, his supervisor confronted him. "Where did you read that name?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry, it was fearful. Before he could answer, she said quietly, "If you value your career, forget it." Some doors should stay closed, but he didn't forget. A few weeks later, an email arrived in his private inbox. No sender, no subject, just an attachment. A scanned letter dated April 3, 1936. It was written by Dr. William Harrow himself. "The first generation has survived longer than expected. The second shall not require mothers at all. Biology will bow to design." Cole read the line again and again. Not require mothers. He realized Harrow hadn't just been experimenting on people. He was trying to replace the process of birth itself, building a system where life could be engineered without weakness, without emotion, without the unpredictability of humanity. Cole shared his findings with a close friend in the bioethics department, Dr. Lila Jensen. She was skeptical at first, until they tested a DNA sequence from one of the mysterious virion samples. It didn't match any known human family tree. The strands were flawless, no mutations, no inherited irregularities, no random errors. It was too perfect. Lila whispered, "This can't be natural." Cole replied softly, "It isn't." They began searching for living subjects tied to the samples. That's when they discovered something terrifying. Several of the sequences matched individuals alive today, living in Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana, perfectly healthy, almost unnaturally so. No major illnesses, no genetic defects, no family histories. When interviewed under pretext of a medical survey, these individuals shared a strange common trait. They rarely dreamed, rarely felt fear, and most reported a sense of quiet in the head. Cole noted in his journal, "They move like rehearsed people. Their eyes don't flicker when they talk. I've never seen anyone so calm. It's like watching a photograph breathe." One of them, a woman named Marianne Cole, shared his last name by coincidence, or maybe not. She was 31, worked as a teacher, and claimed she had been adopted as a baby from a private orphanage in St. Augustine. Her adoption papers were missing the agency stamp. Only a handwritten word appeared where the signature should have been. Phase 5. When Cole ran her DNA, he froze. She was an exact genetic descendant of the Harrow samples, 99.98%, identical to subject 7F, the same subject. Evelyn Price's letters had once described the same line of blood that began inside the walls of that white mansion by the river. By 2007, Cole and Lila had gathered enough evidence to realize something horrifying. Virion Laboratories wasn't studying the Harrow samples. They were continuing them. The company's files revealed a hidden branch operating under the name Project Echo. Its stated purpose: biological symmetry and emotional regulation. In reality, it was the modern rebirth of Harrow's dream, the creation of the perfect human mind. They were using genetic templates to produce embryos artificially, combining modern cloning methods with modified DNA from the original Institute archives. Cole tried to leak the documents, but before he could send them to a journalist, his access was revoked. His ID stopped working. His emails were erased. Lila's apartment was found empty. No sign of struggle, just her laptop still open, a half-finished message on the screen. "They're inside already. The children are not." The rest was corrupted. Cole went into hiding. He stayed in cheap motels along the Gulf Coast, sending fragments of his research to anyone who might listen: universities, journalists, whistleblower sites. Most never responded. A few that did stopped replying after a single message. One night, he received a phone call from a blocked number. The voice was calm, emotionless, precise. "Dr. Cole, you've seen what was not meant to be remembered, but you can still be useful. The design continues. You will help complete it." He hung up, shaking. Later that night, his car alarm went off. When he stepped outside, he found a white envelope on the windshield. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed a group of children standing in a flooded field. Their faces were perfectly still, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. On the back of the photo, one word was printed: return. Cole disappeared 3 days later. Authorities listed him as missing, possibly suicidal. But in 2010, a fisherman near the old Harrow site found something tangled in his net. A sealed metal case, water-damaged but intact. Inside were dozens of printed pages: coordinates, genetic data, photographs, and a voice recorder. The last entry on the tape was Cole's voice. He sounded tired, resigned, but steady. "It's all the same pattern. Harrow wasn't trying to fix humanity. He was trying to erase it. Every generation closer to silence, to obedience. He believed emotion was disease. He built a cure. And now they're not just in Florida. They're everywhere. They've blended in, perfect, quiet, patient, waiting for instruction." The tape ends with a faint sound, a rhythmic hum, distant, mechanical, like an engine breathing in the dark. In the years since, people have reported strange disappearances near the riverbanks again. Locals speak of figures seen at dusk, men and women who walk in perfect formation, their reflections moving a fraction too late in the water. Government officials deny everything, but once in a while, a declassified file slips through, one stamped with the same words found on Harrow's wall nearly a century ago: perfect by design. And somewhere in the quiet heart of Florida, where the swamp hums like a sleeping machine, the legend of the Florida master still stirs, patient, waiting, listening, because perfection never dies. It only hides until the world is ready to accept it. The town of Cedar Key had changed. Tourists now came for the seafood festivals, the art fairs, and the sunsets that melted into the Gulf like slow fire. But beneath the cheerful postcards and neon signs, there was something old still breathing, something that refused to die. By 2005, Dr. Aaron Cole had become obsessed. Every piece of evidence pointed back to a single conclusion: Harrow's work never truly vanished. It evolved, and someone was still funding it. Cole's investigation led him into a forgotten branch of the Florida State University Medical Archives, dusty rooms filled with boxes that hadn't been opened since the 1950s. There, under a broken light, he found an envelope marked Post-Harrow Continuation Files. Inside were hundreds of pages, chemical formulas, maps, and a list of names, each one labeled as Generation C subjects. The earliest name on the list read, Project Chrysalis, 1948. Lead, Dr. Frederick M. Harrow, William's own son. Frederick Harrow had grown up under the shadow of his father's failed dream. He had been a quiet boy, fascinated with order, precision, and purity. After his father's mysterious death in 1942, Frederick disappeared for almost a decade. Then, in 1951, government contracts began surfacing under his name, hidden behind military code names like Operation Genesis and Project Helix. Unlike his father, Frederick didn't preach. He learned from the failure. He went underground where science and secrecy thrived. His methods were quieter, more calculated. Instead of breeding communities, he targeted bloodlines. He believed perfection would not come from building a race, but from editing one. Through the Cold War years, his labs produced results the world never saw. Test subjects vanished from Florida hospitals. Orphaned children were relocated to research facilities. Under the guise of health studies, local newspapers printed small obituaries for people no one could remember. Meeting, behind those stories, was the same signature over and over again. FMH. Cole followed the trail to an abandoned military compound outside Gainesville. The entrance was overgrown. The chain fence rusted, but inside the floors were lined with steel drawers and old specimen jars. He filmed everything. The walls still bore faded stencils. Property of U.S. Armed Forces. Do not remove. At the far end of the corridor, a nameplate read Dr. F.M. Harrow, Genetic Facility Director. In one of the locked drawers, Cole found microfilm reels wrapped in plastic. He took them home, cleaned the dust, and projected them against his living room wall. The footage was black and white, grainy, but horrifyingly clear. Rows of children sitting in chairs, their heads shaved, their arms marked with numbers. Doctors in white coats moved around them, recording notes. At one point, the camera panned toward a window, and there he was, Frederick Harrow. Older, calmer, almost serene. His voice echoed through the static. Perfection is not about strength. It's about control. Nature creates chaos. I will create order. The more Cole uncovered, the more paranoid he became. Phone calls, with no voice on the other end. Cars parked outside his apartment that disappeared when he tried to confront them. When he sent copies of his findings to a friend at a university in Georgia, the package never arrived. 2 weeks later, that friend was reported missing. By late 2006, Cole knew he wasn't just studying history anymore. He was living inside it. The same forces that silenced the past were awake. Again, he began uploading pieces of evidence, anonymously online, scans of the Harrow files, still frames from the footage, and excerpts from classified reports. Within weeks, conspiracy forums were ablaze. Some called it the Florida eugenics revival. Others said Cole had staged everything as part of an internet hoax. But there was one video, the one that couldn't be explained away. Recording from inside the Gainesville facility, dated 1989. The footage showed a man being interviewed in a dark room. The camera was unsteady, the sound muffled, but the interviewer's voice was unmistakable. It was Frederick Harrow's. The man across from him looked terrified, trembling as he spoke. He claimed he had been a caretaker for the children after the military shut the project down in 1973. He said the children were different, not sick, not human. He said they could feel each other's thoughts. Frederick's last words on tape were calm, chilling, almost tender. Evolution doesn't ask for permission. It only needs time. Cole never released the full video. 3 days after posting the teaser clip, he disappeared. His apartment was found empty. The furniture still in place, laptop destroyed. On the wall, someone had written in black marker, "Silence is perfection." To this day, no one knows who wrote it, but the handwriting, when analyzed by investigators years later, matched another file from the 1930s, the signature of Dr. William Harrow. The world had moved on, or at least it believed it had. In 2017, long after Aaron Cole's disappearance, a young documentary filmmaker named Daniel Hargrove was scrolling through archived conspiracy forums when he stumbled upon a series of deleted posts. Each post was linked to a now-defunct site known only as the Chrysalis Files. The content was cryptic, scanned medical documents, old photos of rural Florida, and one recurring name typed in capital letters, Harrow. At first, Daniel thought it was internet fiction, another urban legend recycled for clicks. But when he matched one of the photos with satellite imagery, something didn't add up. The image was of a swamp clearing just outside Gainesville, the same area where the government once claimed to have demolished every remnant of the Harrow Institute. Except the outline of the main facility was still there, perfectly preserved beneath the trees. Daniel decided to go there. He brought 2 cameras, a drone, and his friend, an audio engineer named Mara Lenz. They arrived at dusk, driving through a narrow dirt road that looked abandoned for decades. The silence was thick. Even the insects seemed to avoid the place. When they reached the clearing, their headlights caught the silhouette of a building half sunk into the earth. Concrete cracked, vines climbing the walls, but a rusted sign still clung to the gate. The letters faint but visible under dust. HIG, Harrow Institute of Genetics. Daniel recorded everything. The moment he stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Mara whispered, "Do you feel that?" He nodded. Like the air's been waiting. Inside, the rooms were preserved like frozen time. Metal tables, old typewriters, glass slides labeled Specimen 14C. And on the far wall, a framed photo, William Harrow with his son Frederick, both standing proudly in front of the first facility in 1935. As night fell, the 2 explorers reached the lower level. The stairs led to a basement sealed by a heavy steel door. It took Daniel nearly an hour to force it open. What they found on the other side didn't look like a lab anymore. It looked like a nursery, rows of small cribs, now decayed and eaten by mold. Above them, faded nameplates, Eli, June, Marcus, Alma, and painted on the far wall, a slogan that had outlasted decades of darkness. Through flesh, we ascend. Mara began filming close-ups. These cribs, they're too small. They weren't for children, she said quietly. Daniel frowned. Then what were they for? Before she could answer, a soft sound echoed from one of the rooms ahead. A faint metallic rhythm, like something tapping against a vent. They froze. Daniel followed the sound with his flashlight. The beam landed on a small glass enclosure. Inside was a cylindrical container, sealed with thick metal bolts. On the label, Subject C01, Sample Active. Do not expose. The cylinder was humming. It shouldn't have been. It had no power connection, no visible machinery. But the sound was real. A low vibration pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel lifted his camera, whispering, "Get this on record." As he zoomed in, the cylinder's condensation cleared just enough for him to see what was inside. A mass of tissue, pale and veined, faintly twitching. The humming grew louder. The floor beneath them vibrated. Mara panicked, shouting, "Daniel, we need to go!" But before they could turn, the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, every fluorescent bulb in the corridor came alive, bright white, buzzing, and the walls illuminated with symbols they hadn't noticed before. Hundreds of them, carved into the concrete, CHRYSALIS. Then everything went black. When Daniel woke up, it was morning. Sunlight poured through the shattered windows. His equipment was gone. Mara was gone too. He stumbled outside, confused, his body aching. His phone had no signal, but the time on it had changed. It read 9:47 a.m., March 11th. He remembered arriving the previous night, but the date should have been March 9th. 2 full days had passed. When he finally made it back to town, no one believed him. The police searched the swamp but found no trace of the institute. No building, no gate, nothing. It was as if the entire structure had sunk into the earth overnight. Daniel uploaded what little footage remained, mostly static and distorted audio, to his YouTube channel. Within hours, it went viral. Some viewers claimed they could hear a whisper beneath the static, a woman's voice repeating the phrase, "Through flesh, we ascend." Others pointed out shapes in the shadows of the video. Human figures, watching. 3 months later, Daniel received a package with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive labeled Generation C. He hesitated for hours before opening it. The files were encrypted, but one video played without a password. It showed an underground room, sterile and white, with a row of glass tanks filled with a translucent liquid. Inside each tank floated a human silhouette, motionless, expressionless. As the camera panned across the room, a figure in a lab coat stepped into view. He looked straight at the lens, smiled faintly, and said, "My father failed, but perfection doesn't die. It learns." The video ended abruptly. The timestamp at the corner read, 2012. Harrow Institute Revival Unit. Daniel vanished 2 weeks later. His channel was wiped clean. His footage removed from every platform. Only fragments survived, re-uploaded by anonymous users who claimed to have downloaded the files before deletion. Some said the government took him. Others whispered something worse, that the Institute took him back. Because months after his disappearance, several residents near Gainesville began reporting strange sightings at night. Children wandering the woods, barefoot, pale, silent. When locals called out to them, they didn't respond. They just stared, tilting their heads in perfect unison, and then walked away into the dark. Authorities called it hysteria. But deep in the Florida swamps, where fog still hangs like old breath, people swear they can hear something when the wind is still. A faint hum, like a heart that refuses to stop beating. And sometimes, if you listen closely, a voice behind the hum whispers through the mist, "Perfection needs no witness." The night Clara Mendez drove into the Apalachicola marshes, the air was unnaturally still. No crickets, no frogs, just a long, endless silence that seemed to breathe with her car engine. She parked by the tree line, flashlight trembling in her hand. The GPS coordinates Daniel Hargrove had left in his final video brought her here, a patch of wet land that, according to every government map, didn't exist. But the moment she stepped out of the car, she saw it, half buried under roots and moss, a metal hatch. It was old, but not rusted. Someone had been maintaining it. The door groaned open after a few pulls. A rush of stale, cold air escaped from below, the scent of iron and decay. She climbed down a narrow steel ladder into darkness. Her flashlight flickered over the walls. This wasn't a bunker. It was a modern clean operational. Computers hummed quietly. Vats of liquid bubbled in the corners. And lining the main hallway were rows of glass pods, each one filled with a pale, sleeping figure suspended in blue fluid. Men, women, children, their faces calm, their chests rising and falling, like they were dreaming. Clara's voice recorder was running. This is active. Someone's still running Harrow's work. She walked deeper inside until she found the central chamber. A nameplate above the door read, HIG Division C, Renewal Lab. Inside, a massive screen displayed a digital DNA sequence looping endlessly. On the table beside it was a framed photo, the same one Daniel had found years ago. William Harrow with his son Frederick. But the picture was different now. Someone had drawn a third figure beside them, a man with no face. Clara turned on her camera and began filming everything. That's when she heard footsteps. A shadow appeared at the far end of the hall. A man in a black coat stepped into the light. His voice was calm, steady, unnervingly familiar. "You shouldn't be here, Ms. Mendez." She aimed her flashlight at him. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "You already know. My name is Harrow." Clara froze. "That's impossible. Frederick died in 1979. The man tilted his head. "You mean the first Frederick?" He stepped closer, and for a brief moment, the light revealed his face, ageless, eerily symmetrical, like a photograph come to life. "We've had many renewals since then. The human shell is replaceable. The design is not," and he gestured to the pods around them. "These are the future. Generation D. Each one a step closer to perfection, immune to disease, immune to fear, immune to failure." Clara's voice trembled. "You're playing God." Harrow chuckled softly. "No, God stopped evolving. I didn't." He reached for a console and pressed a button. The liquid inside the pods began to drain. One by one, the figures opened their eyes, faint white pupils glowing in the dark. They stared directly at her, not blinking, not breathing, only waiting. "Do you understand now?" Harrow whispered. "The perfect race doesn't need to be created. It needs to be remembered." Clara backed away, fumbling for her camera. "People will find this," she said. "The world will know what you've done." Harrow shook his head gently. "The world doesn't care about truth, Ms. Mendez. It cares about comfort, and comfort demands silence." He raised a syringe filled with a clear fluid. "But you'll be remembered. The first of a new generation." Clara turned to run, but before she could reach the ladder, everything went black. 3 weeks later, her car was found abandoned near the coast. Inside were her camera batteries, half-burned notebooks, and a recorder that stopped midway through a single phrase. The children, they're awake. No footage, no samples. No physical trace of the lab was ever found. Government teams swept the area and declared it swamp erosion. But locals say that on quiet nights, you can still see faint lights moving under the water, like something glowing beneath the surface. And sometimes, when fog drifts through the marsh, people swear they hear voices whispering, soft, layered, identical. Through flesh, we ascend. In 2025, an anonymous package arrived at a university in Tallahassee. Inside was a hard drive labeled The Harrow Legacy. When investigators opened it, they found DNA samples, high-resolution images of pod chambers, and a single video file. The footage showed a newborn child, eyes open, heart beating steadily, and standing beside the cradle. The man in the black coat staring at the camera with a faint smile. He spoke only one line before the video ended. "Perfection is patient." The file was deleted from every official database within 4 hours. No agency claimed responsibility. No one admitted to seeing the footage, but the coordinates at the end of the file pointed to a new location, this time off the coast of Miami. And those who've seen the image say it's unmistakable. A large underwater dome with the letters HIG engraved across its entrance. The Harrow Institute never died. It simply went deeper. If you love the darkness, stay with us. Subscribe before the lights go out.